Here we go. Good evening and welcome. I'm Reverend Jeff Snyder, and this is Beyond Loaves and Fishes, the online Bible study, the live stream Bible study. We'll be waiting here for a couple of minutes for people to show up. Well, hello, Julius. Glad to see that you're here. And Will, excellent. Wow, right at the start. Fantastic. And so, we are ready to continue tonight with the book of Esther. We left off with a real cliffhanger last week, and in which it was time to see what the king was going to do with the proposal from Haman, which was a disastrous proposal designed for the death of the diaspora Jews throughout the kingdom of Persia. So, we're going to pick up where we left off in just a second. Give a few more people a chance to show up. Get this thing started. So, welcome. It's good to have you here. We're getting everything squared away a little bit better now. And I hope... Hey, Cheney, how you doing? How are you and the whole family? I see you out there. So here it is. Let's go ahead and plunge in. Now, you remember when Queen Vashti refused to take part in the king's invitation to come out and be shown off in front of a bunch of drunken cronies of his, and how she just absolutely refused to do this, and therefore the king, Ahasuerus, decides he's going to consult with the very smartest people, the very best consultants, and decide what they should do. And their wonderful idea was that she should no longer be queen. We should throw the whole monarchy into crisis by having her vacate the throne and then look for a new queen. Now, that wasn't really great decision making, but that's what they decided to do. And after that, now we have an even worse problem. Haman has suggested that all of the Jews in the land of Persia who are under the king's influence ought to be wiped out. There should be a genocide, all because one Jew, a man named Mordecai, refused to bow to Haman at the gates. So this time the king doesn't consult with anybody. He just goes ahead and decides, yep, that's a really good idea. We'll go ahead and do what Haman wants. And in fact, without consulting anybody, he decides that genocide will be a very fine thing. And he tells Haman, do with them as it seems good to you. So that's where we are today. And there's some dark truth behind this humor. Remember, this is meant to entertain during the celebration of Purim. And so there's exaggeration involved, there's good storytelling involved, there's suspense involved. And now we're going to see what happens next. We're starting chapter 4 now. We ended chapter 3, so chapter 4, verses 1 through 3. That's what we'll be reading right now. When Mordecai learned all that had been done, Mordecai tore his clothes. This is Queen Esther's uncle, remember? And put on sackcloth and ashes, and went through the city, wailing with a loud and bitter cry. He went up to the entrance of the king's gate, for no one might enter the king's gate clothed with sackcloth. In every province, wherever the king's command and his decree came, there was great mourning among the Jews, with fasting and weeping and lamenting, and most of them lay in sackcloth and ashes. This is a disaster in the making, and they know it. So, now remember, Mordecai had saved the king. he had ended the conspiracy against him by a couple of the king's own eunuchs, a couple of his servants who were angry with him, and you can see why people might be angry with the king, considering his decision-making abilities. But apparently that doesn't mean much when one of the king's cronies, Haman, has felt insulted and slighted by Mordecai. So there's an interesting situation going on here, though. People can live in bubbles. We know this. We know that you can get caught up in a little bubble, not understand what's going on. And the queen, in this case, is completely out of the loop. She doesn't know what the king is up to. She's sheltered in the palace. She's living in her little information bubble. And she has no idea this decree has gone out. She has no idea that her people are in danger, that they may die. Well, she doesn't have any idea that she's in danger and may die. And yes, the Bible study is going on. Somebody has asked me that question. Are we having a Bible study? Yes. Excuse me. Live. Now. All right. I'm working in multiple mediums here. We'll get this all figured out. Ah, there we go. Hi, Lisa. Welcome. Good to have you here. So, things are picking up now. And not understanding what's going on, Esther tries to help Mordecai by sending him clothes so that he can take off these sackcloths. She doesn't understand why he's wearing sackcloth and ashes, which is what Jews did when they were in mourning, when they were bitterly unhappy about something or needed to repent from some sin, like Job does. So Mordecai rejects these offerings from the queen. The queen is just entirely out of the loop. And you can see how this can happen, how you can, how people all around you can keep you from knowing the truth. So when Mordecai and Esther are able to communicate, they can communicate through a eunuch named Hatshak. Well, we're going to go with that at least. Hathach, who was assigned to her. And Mordecai told Esther what Haman had done. He reveals the truth to her about what's going on, the crisis that her people are facing, and he tells her, you need to intervene with the king to save all of us. You have to save your own people. And this is a terrifying thing for him to call her to do, because going to the king without an invitation is deadly dangerous. It's a breach of palace protocol. Now, when the previous queen didn't come at the beck and call of the king, she was dethroned and banished. Now, if Esther shows up without an invitation, it could be far worse from her. To come uninvited before the king is to die. And Esther tells Mordecai that she hadn't been called by the king in the past 30 days. We don't know why, but she hasn't. Mordecai's response is interesting. This is from chapter 4, verses 13 and 14. Mordecai to Esther through Hatshak. Do not think that in the king's palace you will escape any more than all the other Jews. For if you keep silence at such a time as this, relief and deliverance will rise for the Jews from another quarter, but you and your father's family will perish. Who knows? Perhaps you have come to royal dignity for just such a time as this. Esther's ethnic origins are unknown to the king. Mordecai is now telling Esther that she's going to suffer the same fate as the rest of the Jews. The palace, which has left her in an information bubble, will not save her from the awful fate that awaits. He states that help may come or will come from a different quarter if you don't act. But it won't save you. And it won't save me. Doing nothing is not a solution. Not risking your own skin is not a solution. the sense of safety you feel while staying safe is false when you're shirking your responsibility to your people, when you're shirking your responsibility to a cause greater than yourself. And this advice applies to any age, as you can imagine. There are times when we need to place ourselves in personal risk to assist others. It's what we're called to do. And there are times when we need to speak out, even when personal risk may be involved. Can you think of any times where that might be appropriate these days? Anything that's currently going on that might require or call for us to speak out against actions or in favor of actions that need to be taken in the world today? There's plenty going around. And it certainly, Mordecai speaks to all of us, asking ourselves, are we going to step up? If we don't, someone will. But who? And if we don't, what damage do we do to ourselves by avoiding it? The Black Lives Matter movement, the Me Too movement, absolutely, those are great examples. I'm sure we can think of a lot of other situations as well going on in the world right now that could seriously be addressed. Now, Esther's response. Esther steps up to be a hero at this point. I don't think that's spoiling too much. And she says, "Go gather all the Jews to be found in Susa," that's the capital city, the citadel city, "and hold a fast on my behalf, and neither eat nor drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my maids will also fast as you do. After that I will go to the king, though it is against the law. And if I perish, I perish." That is a heroic response. And it's also a wise response. Pray together, fast together, support each other. Excellent preparation when something important needs to be done. It's a great idea. So Mordecai now, he's given Esther a job, and now she in return has given him one, and he doesn't shirk that job either. He obeys his queen. And now there's some light touches that get involved in this, including Haman's pomposity and the king's foolishness. There's an assurance for the original audience in this. You build up the suspense, you build up the grim nature of things for a little while, and then you let off some steam. You let people know that they don't have to be too frightened by what's going on. And so there are some aspects of this that will act as comic relief with this awful, and this assurance that this awful threat is not going to come to pass. Just as you'd have a comic relief character in stories today to help temper terror or suspense. I'm sure you can think of a lot of sidekicks who have provided that kind of relief in a moment of deep tension in some of the movies or in some of the stories that we read and hear today. But in light of all the genocides the Jews have faced, for all the suffering that they've had outside of Esther, these threats aren't really a laughing matter. We need to remember that this was a relief and a release valve for the audience living in terribly challenging times. All right. Now, I'm going to take a moment. I'm going to ask you a question. Whom do you have power over? Think about that for a minute. Now, you're going to think that your first response is going to be, if you're not a CEO, a military leader, or somebody along those lines, you can say, oh, nobody. I don't have power over anybody. But we need to explore that a little bit more. I'm not sure that's entirely true. Most of us have some power over others, over somebody. First and foremost, myself. I thought I like that. Thank you, Will. But, for example, parents of small children can have influence over their kids. My children, exactly. Spouses may have it over each other as well. Often partners have all sorts of ways of getting across their wishes and receiving positive responses. I'm sure you've developed some of your own. My wife and I have been married for 34 years, and we certainly have. Those under my care and control, absolutely. Julius. Let's see. So, and of course you also have power over people like serving staff when you're out at a restaurant, workers in shops that you are visiting, and you have the power to make their days good or to make their days miserable. If you know a secret about someone, you have power over them as well. You could reveal it and embarrass them, or you could in some cases, do great damage to their careers or their lives. So yes, we all do have some sort of power. If someone overdoes that power by domineering or bullying others, like their underlings, then their underlings may respond with passive-aggressive resistance. Production may slow down at a company. Mistakes may be made as a way of resisting that power. Or if you're at a restaurant and you make life miserable for the serving staff or for the cook, that seems like a really bad idea, because they could do something passive-aggressively to your food that you might not appreciate. I've always wondered about people being particularly nettlesome with people who can make their lives difficult. Like a doctor or a nurse who's about to give you a shot. That wouldn't be the time, I would think, that you'd want to try to have power over them. Now, whenever in a situation today 2 or more people are involved, you're going to have issues of power present and issues of power exerted, one over the other. We all have power over somebody. We can all make somebody miserable. When I was working with a youth group, I would always tell them that at any moment on any day you can be a blessing or a curse to someone. Much preferable to be a blessing than a curse. I got to live that out one time in an emergency room, and I saw the benefit of not making the people that were working with me miserable. That worked out really well. Now, one thing we learn from Esther is that power is best used when it's employed for the good of others, rather than simply for the benefit of ourselves. That's a great life lesson right there. Haman shows what happens when we don't learn that particular lesson, and that is a really costly mistake, as we will soon see. Esther knows that's up to her to save her people, the Jews and the entire Persian Empire. If she doesn't step up, if she doesn't get the job done, they will all be destroyed. Success will depend on asking the king, her husband, who hasn't called for her in 30 days. Well, she's going to have to ask him to go against his own edict, his own order, one calling for the Jews' slaughter. Now, I haven't met any kings personally, but I can imagine that when a king has made an order, particularly one that he says can't be rescinded, that a king's not going to be really appreciative of someone telling him, you really have to change that, you've really messed up. That wouldn't be a particularly healthy thing to do you think? I don't think so. So, it takes a clever approach. So, at the same time, Esther's weighing these things. She'll also have to let him know that she herself is Jewish, which she has never bothered to bring up to him. And this is risky business, one that could go very badly for her if the king decides to take offense. at all of this. So, how often in our lives do things like this come back to bite us when we try to skate by them? How often do we just not quite mention every little detail and hope that nobody notices, and sooner or later it comes back around, like somebody who's fudged on their resume and said they've done a particular thing when they really haven't, and then their new employer expects them to go do that thing? Yeah, things just kind of come back around. So here we are with Esther. We're in a moment where things have come full circle. Now, chapter 4 ends in this way. Then Esther said in reply to Mordecai, oh no, we've already read that. We don't need to read that again. If I perish, I perish. Mordecai then went away and did everything that Esther had ordered him. All right, so we're back there. Now, this is an excellent time for Esther to prepare herself emotionally and for the people to prepare themselves as well. And it's also a time when Esther needs to come up with a clever plan. Something that you might hear from a particular British comedy show. My lord, I have a clever plan. So, I think my wife would know that reference, and the actor who says it, which is I'm blanking on. Care to weigh in there, Sherry? All right. So, after 3 days of calculating and praying and seeking inspiration in the support of her people, dressed in her royal best, Esther takes up a position in the inner courtyard of the palace where Ahasuerus, the king, is sure to see her. She's dressed for success, and she's followed the old rule, location, location, location. She's ready to go. Thankfully, with her efforts that she has made, Ahasuerus is pleased when he notices her, and he extends his golden scepter towards her, which is a signal that Esther is welcome to approach. So Esther isn't going to die from this immediate moment of confrontation when things could have gone terribly wrong or terribly right. He recognized her appearance in the courtyard without being summoned meant that she had a request. But he was feeling generous that day, and he made a formulaic statement to let her know that his generosity was available to her. He says in chapter 5, verse 3, the king said to her, "What is it, Queen Esther? What is your request? It shall be given you, even to the half of my kingdom." Seems very generous, doesn't it? But both he and Esther knew that this is hyperbole. This is an exaggeration here. It's not to be taken literally. She can't really ask for half the kingdom, but she can ask for a favor, and he's going to be more likely to grant it. So this is a good sign. It meant the king is ready to grant a reasonable request, even if it's something out of the ordinary. Well, that's another good life lesson for all of us, to know how to read the signs, when not to take something someone has told you literally, but to understand it for what it really is, to see beneath the surface. And that's a good thing for us to remember in our modern lives. So we've made it past the instant death. But now a really tricky moment has arrived. What is it that Esther's going to do? What is she going to say? She's not going to come right out and say to the king, "What a stupid plan you've made. By the way, I'm one of the people that you're going to kill. You need to take that all back right now." We can imagine that wouldn't go over really well. So, Esther says in chapter 5, verse 4, Esther is smooth about it. She says, "If it pleases the king, let the king and Haman come today to a banquet that I have prepared for the king." Here's an indirect approach to a volatile man, a powerful person, coming in at both a gesture that will flatter him? Remember, he's already thrown a 6-month party followed by a 7-day feast full of booze and food. So obviously, his stomach is away to this man. Now, that's an easy way to get to his heart. And so I'm going to throw you a banquet. I want you to come. I want Haman to come. And we haven't gotten to her larger request yet at all. Just come to dinner. Does this strategy work today? Does food, to the best of your knowledge, still help to seal deals? What do you think? Does it work in the life of the church? What kind of effect does casserole have on people? How many casserole dishes do you think Baptist families own? I'm going to take a little sip here, let you mull over that. All right. Now it's likely that Ahasuerus the king has realized that Esther has something big in mind. For when he and Haman go to the meal, the king repeats himself. And he repeats his half of his kingdom offer to Esther again, trying to draw her out a little bit and find out what it is that she really wants. But Esther isn't going to bite on that. Esther is very smooth. Esther is very smart. Esther is a real operator in the highest level of politics in her day. She dodges the real request and instead asks her husband and Haman to come to another feast. I'm going to throw you another one, even better than this one, that she's preparing for the very next day. Flattery on top of flattery. Food works when people are interested in the greater cause. Yes, indeed, it does, Lisa. And so, in chapter 5, verses 7 through 8, Esther comes to it. She says, this is my petition and request. If I have won the king's favor, and if it pleases the king to grant my petition and fulfill my request, let the king and Haman come tomorrow to the banquet that I have prepared for them, and then I will do as the king had said. Ha 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 ha. She's dodged the issue for that second time, preparing for the second meal. And this has a real impact on Haman, who is a very vain individual. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been so upset with Mordecai not bowing to him at the gate. And she's playing on this. This is Esther's nemesis. And in chapter 5, verses 9 through 11, Haman went out that day happy and in good spirits. But when Haman saw Mordecai at the king's gate and observed that he neither rose nor trembled before him, he was infuriated with Mordecai. Nevertheless, Haman restrained himself and went home. Then he sent and called for his friends and his wife Zeresh, and Haman recounted to them the splendor of his riches, the number of his sons, all the promotions with which the king had honored him, and how he advanced him above the officials and ministers of the king. In terms of the story, the two feasts function to create an interlude between them where Haman's high regard for himself puts him in a really ludicrous position. He's going to end up having to honor someone publicly that he didn't expect to have to honor. Esther is really setting him up. In chapter 5, verses 13 through 6:11, the plot thickens. Yet all this does me no good so long as I see that Jew Mordecai sitting at the king's gate. Then his wife Zeresh and all his friends said to him, let a gallows 50 cubits high be made, and in the morning tell the king to have Mordecai hanged on it. Then go with the king to the banquet in good spirits. This advice pleased Haman, and he had the gallows made. On that night the king could not sleep, and he gave orders to bring the book of records, the annals, and they were read to the king. It was found written how Mordecai had told about Bigthana and Teresh, two of the king's eunuchs who guarded the threshold and who had conspired to assassinate King Ahasuerus. Then the king said, "What honor or distinction has been bestowed on Mordecai for this?" The king's servants who attended him said, "Nothing has been done for him." And you know what? We have reached our half hour. We're done for tonight. Tune in next week to find out what happens with Haman, what the king discovers and decides, how the king will react to that giant gallows that's being built, and what is it that Esther has planned for that second meal. Come in, join us next week. Same time, same place, and we'll pick this up again. And if you like what you see here tonight, and you're joining us for the first time, hit the subscribe button at the bottom of the screen, or if you're watching this later and want to watch it live, hit the subscribe button here at this site and join us each and every week as we explore Esther and other books of the Bible. I think we'll start with Matthew next. So, good night for now. I hope to see you all soon. And until we meet again, may God be with you. Good night.